Even today, where I have probably the highest, what I'd call hit rate that I've ever had in my career, I would say probably 2 to 3 out of 10 pieces of content that I produce achieve what I hope that they would.
Hey bootstrappers, welcome to Bootstrap Stories, the podcast where founders, marketers, and thoughtful leaders share the most actionable tips on building a successful business. After meeting with hundreds of bootstrappers in the past years, I figured out that we all struggle to grow our businesses. But the truth is that most of us don't know where to ask for help or advice. That's why I decided to start this podcast, to give you all the keys to succeed at every stage of your business. All the tested strategies for solving your struggles and taking your business to a new level. No fluff, no bullshit, only a real talk between friends that help each other succeed. Today, my guest for this episode is Rand Fishkin, serial entrepreneur who co-founded Moz and Sparktoro, and also the author of the amazing book, Lost and Founder. Rand, welcome to Bootstrap Story.
Thanks for having me, Guillaume. Good to be here.
Yeah, I'm super excited. We had a chat, I think it was a couple years ago, so I think a lot have changed. Before we start talking a little bit about Sparktoro, I'm also curious, to get to know you a little bit better. Can you maybe introduce yourself and let us know how you got started with entrepreneurship in the first place?
Sure. Yeah. So for folks who didn't hear our previous episode, so my mom and I were actually the founders of Moz back in 2003. So I dropped out of college and started working with her doing website design. She had been running a small business marketing agency for a long time, just a solo shop. And web design stuff didn't go very well. We got into SEO consulting after sort of fumbling around for a bit. And that began to take off with this website that I had started called SEO Moz, which became Moz, the software company. I was the CEO of that business from, 2007 until 2014. And then, stepped down, stayed at the company a few more years, and then left and started Sparktoro.
And how did you make the transition from Moz to Sparktoro? How exactly did it happen?
So I, not easily.
Okay.
So after stepping down from the CEO role at Moz, I sort of hoped and thought things were going to go very smoothly. I had a really good working relationship with my chief operating officer for, many, many years, and thought that she would do a great job in the CEO role, and that our association would continue to be great. And it started to experience a lot of tension, probably into even in that first year or two, and then got essentially sort of untenable. And I disagreed with a lot of the decisions that leadership was making, and that the board of directors was choosing to support. So I was the chairman of the board, but once you raise venture capital, as you probably know, you don't have the sort of full influence and control that you might if you're the CEO of a self-owned business or another kind of financed business. And so eventually, I think mutually agreed on a departure, and that was not a friendly process. There were attorneys involved. It took a year of negotiation.
Wow.
But eventually, I left Moz / Moz asked me to leave.
Okay.
And it was, I think I wrote about it back in 2018 on my last day there. I wrote a blog post, published it that night, and basically said that, on a scale of 0 to 10, where 10 is you hug everybody, they're clapping for you when you leave the building and you're welcome back anytime, and 0 is dragged out onto the street by security and thrown out the door. Homer Simpson style. My departure was like a 4 out of 10.
Okay, so not what you expect, especially after so much time, like building the business and everything. And do you feel like if you had not raised venture capital, it would have gone totally different way? Or is that something right now you feel against it? Or what tips would you give to, to bootstrappers who might be asking themselves, should I raise or should I just stay bootstrapped?
I don't think there's a right answer for everybody, but I think, even most venture capitalists would say that venture is wrong for 99% of businesses. And I agree with that statement. And I think that the 1% that it's right for is a very specific kind of group, right? It is, you have a low odds but potential path to spend lots of money very quickly to reach sort of hundreds of millions or billions of dollars in revenue and kind of become a sector dominating monopoly in your space, build up moats to prevent competition, those sorts of things, which I think are generally bad for society and the macro economy, but can be quite wealth accumulating for a small number of founders and their investors. Which is, if people are wondering, like, how did we get to such income and wealth inequality? Well, venture capital is a big contributor to that, because the whole model is, invest in 1,000 companies, 990 of them sort of fail and don't do anything. And then like the other, few make a, hopefully, return you the whole fund.
Yeah.
In terms of, my personal sense is that the problem is that while venture capital, Guillaume, it's wrong for 99% of companies, but in tech space, it is marketed to 100% of us. I think that's what sucks.
And how do you feel like this could change, for example?
I mean, I think that we need more and more public examples of bootstrap businesses, indie funded businesses, other funding models, right? Kickstarted businesses and employee owned businesses. I think that if some of those examples become prominent and well studied in the space, and those businesses, even if they're smaller, if they build interesting and exciting things and get a little bit of the press coverage and prestige that venture world has gotten, maybe that starts to shift. Because I think that, for me as an entrepreneur, I always felt before I raised money in, 2007? And even after my first round, right, I always felt like I was a second class entrepreneur, right? Like I'm not good enough to play with the big kids. I have an adorable little business that's only doing a few $1 million of revenue a year, or whatever it is.
Which is already huge, like for most people. Yeah.
And how silly is it that, you've got a profitable business, that's nice for you, but when you're ready to be, sort of in the big leagues, then you're supposed to spend much more than you make and pursue growth instead of profits. And it is a very intense indoctrination process that I think a ton of entrepreneurs in that world go through. And by, I was participating in like the conferences and events and going down to San Francisco and sort of getting exposed to this whole world of people who I thought were really impressive, and I wanted to be like them, and got to have dinners with these entrepreneurs whose names and I don't want to name drop because I think it's silly, and I think like all that kind of stuff feeds into this mindset of I'm not good enough unless I not do well with my business, not serve my customers well, not make a great product, not build something that lasts a long time and makes for a lot of happy employees, but I raised a lot of money from a fund that has an impressive name.
Yeah.
That's yeah, so I think we have to change some of that mentality and a lot of the the ecosystem that we all exist in.
And I think like something you mentioned, about like having the press potentially like cover a bit more inspiring bootstrap stories and like of entrepreneurs who actually grew their business, etc. It's I'm always wondering, like why they are not covering more of these stories, knowing especially that if you look at most articles and fundraising and this type of things, we tend, and I was the same as you, like when I started Lemlist for me in the early days, I tried to raise funds and I just got slapped so many times that I said, you know what, fuck it, I'm just going to grow it on my own. It's fine. So I got rejected, which in the end, I think served me pretty well. But the thing is like, I'm wondering like, why do you think those like the press and those journalists working at those, I don't know, like TechCrunch or whatever journal are mainly covering like those impressive fundraiser? Is it because, like they are fundraised as well? Or do you think it's, okay.
Hey, yeah. I mean, if you look at the owners and investors and the network of, whatever it is, Read Write Web or the Next Web or VentureBeat or TechCrunch or, any of these media outlets. I mean, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, like all of these folks are well connected to kind of the sources of capital that include, the venture funding and financing world. So it makes a lot of sense that would be what they are hiring reporters to cover, right? Okay. What they're telling their team to write about, and that ecosystem has a lot of money and a lot of interest in both encouraging that sort of coverage and in creating, I would say, not even nefariously necessarily, but through their networks, through the things that they support, right? That, hey, let's buy some ads from this place, and hey, let's run a co-marketed event with this publication, and hey, yes, we're gonna put some money. Some of our venture investors are individually going to put money into these media companies, which might not be venture funded classically, but have the similar structures. All that kind of incestuous ecosystem stuff is happening, and it's not like venture capitalists all get together, in a stormy castle one October evening and are like, "How should we control the media?" It's not that. It's much more.
It's insidious, like it happens, and
it's mundane, right?
Yeah.
It's, hey, I'm going to coffee with this guy, and hey, we think you should write about this, and oh, okay, let me put one of my reporters on it. And you should set up a beat to cover the LA funding scene, because no one's really covering that right now. And there's a lot of money there and a lot of interest there. And, I bet if you covered it, you probably could. It's that.
Okay. And something you did actually, like when starting Sparktoro, if I remember correctly, you raised a little bit of money, not as like VC funded, and then you published, I think, your term sheet and make it accessible to all. Can you go back to this and also maybe explain how, who are your investors right now and what they are expecting from the business, and what is this kind of shift in mindset?
Yeah. So I think, anytime you identify a problem in the world, you have sort of three options. You can say, well, there's nothing I can do about it, or you can sort of vocally complain about it, but not too much else, or you can vocally complain about it and try and do things to make a difference. And look, I don't want to pretend like Sparktoro's open sourcing of its funding is going to change this whole equation, but we wanted to do something. I wanted to do something passionately that had an opportunity to change it, even for a few people. And so what we did is created a very unique kind of funding structure that we raised 1.3 million from 36 angel investors. I think I'm one of the angel investors, so me and 35 other folks. And And then essentially we have a structure whereby Sparktoro is designed to last for a long time as a business and pay dividends from the profits that the business generates, with the first 1.3 million that we generate in profits going back to our investors to repay them. And it doesn't have to be right away, right? We have the option of when we want to do that, so we can, build up a store of capital. And, if we are like, oh, well, we have the money to pay them back, but we see this big growth opportunity right now, let's go invest it. We can do that too, right? So it gives us a lot of freedom and flexibility. But then once we repay our investors their 1.3, everybody participates in pro rata dividends through profit sharing, including Casey and I. So essentially, my co-founder and I are incentivized in the same way that our investors are sort of incentivized, which is, hey, let's all get a profitable business that can last for a long time with, hopefully relatively low costs. It could be a $1 million business or a $5 million business or a $10 million business and be successful at all those numbers, which of course, none of those numbers are venture scale successes, as you know. And so that is what we hope can be one funding model that other folks could consider. We think that if investors were to build portfolios of companies like Sparktoro, basically built to last for a long time, built to become profitable and stay that way for a long time, that they could make as much or more money than even successful venture funds, because essentially, rather than having one or two companies support a portfolio of 200 companies that failed, you get a portfolio where hopefully 70 of the 100 companies you invest in survive for a long time and put out their profits, and even many of the 30 repay their investment before things go south. That is a model that we think can build happier customers, right? Because they're customers of companies that last for a long time, that are built to last rather than built to extract kind of maximum growth. They are likely companies that provide a much better experience for employees and for founders as well. And more broadly in that macroeconomic sense that we were talking about, we think this is the true engine of large-scale economic growth and opportunity, right? If essentially most of the economy were filled with small and medium businesses rather than very large ones, historically that has led to much less wealth concentration and income inequality, and it's led to much greater economic growth, because small and medium businesses,
exactly.
Everybody puts the money back into the ecosystem, right, as opposed to the extraction model.
No, I think it's really interesting, and something you mentioned, which I think is also like crazy. It's like, when right now with this venture capital kind of model, even if a company is making like a few millions in annual recurring revenue, you would think that it's not successful, which I think is just like crazy, to think about this like that, because you have so many businesses, that can be successful and that are worth like a lot, even at those stages. And we tried, I think, with the recent fundraising, we've been changing, I think, our mindset when talking about money and all these type of things. And I'm not sure if you're familiar about the company Fast. They had raised like it's fast.co or something like that. They raised like $130 million. And in the end, we realized that those guys were making only 50K MRR. And, they were like just like showing off on social media, like giving merch to everyone, everywhere. Founder was skydiving all the time, etc. Like pretending like, I'm the coolest kid on the block, etc. And like with your model, with 130 million, they could have funded, like 130 company at least, creating like that many jobs and last forever. While right now you have hundreds of people getting laid off and no output.
I mean, it is frankly just astoundingly weird to me how uncommon a model like Sparktoro's is. And I think that, it's something that can only change if, an entire ecosystem changes, right?
Yeah.
So it has to start from, hey, what stories do we tell and what do we hear about and what are examples? And this is, I think, one of the biggest kind of obligations that I feel, Guillaume, for Sparktoro, for me, is we need to be a success story, a relatively large success story, if we want to impact a lot of people into thinking about, their model differently. As frustrating as it is, right? I think that something that appears to be true in the world of business and finance and media is that the amount of money that you make and or the amount of sort of users and growth impact that you have is directly proportionate to whether people feel like they should listen to you.
Yeah.
And that's deeply frustrating to me. I think that there is probably a lot more wisdom contained in people who have not raised millions of dollars and have not built businesses that have 100 million, users and have not, had billion-dollar exits, but still have a tremendous amount that we can learn from them.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, those voices are not what gets covered.
No, I agree. And I think it was like there were data actually about it, like the fastest, I think it's Inc. 500 or something like that. Like in the US, like the top companies are not the one who received always like VC funded. And actually there were a lot of bootstrap companies in those companies, but no one is aware of them. Like it's like you would never have heard of that specific business, and they are making like billions sometimes. So it's just crazy. And I think you're really involved, and even like your book, Lost and Founder, which is like really, really awesome. I recommend everyone to read it if they have not. Like you are really like trying to take part, of this movement of building in public, transparency, and trying to change the system. Is that something you've tried or you've thought of developing at a larger scale? So right now, obviously, you have like a Sparktoro, you're growing the business, etc. But I'm trying to think like a longer term. Would you be interested in, for example, like launching kind of your own fund or whatever that would kind of like build and invest in those type of companies and use, what you've learned and everything that you've done so far to grow businesses to kind of like either advise a little bit like those companies and try to, like instead of just sharing it, maybe like building something around it and trying to scale this new model? Or do you feel it's more just about like sharing and letting it grow as people pick it up and maybe improve it also as it goes?
This is definitely a question I've asked myself. I think that the answer is, in the short term, my focus is on Sparktoro and other projects. But longer term, I think especially if it turns out that Sparktoro is a decent wealth generating machine, 5, 10, 15 years from now, that would almost certainly be something I'd very much like to do. So Geraldine and I, my wife and I, do a little bit of investing, but it's very small, right? Because our ability to invest sort of financially is just not there. But one of the things that we support is a fund doing exactly what you're talking about, called Tiny Seed Fund. So Rob Walling, who a lot of folks know from MicroConf. Rob and his partner Einar started this fund that actually uses Sparktoro's model. So we had a conversation early on, I think when they were starting up 2019, and they essentially, it's a slightly modified version of that, but it uses the Sparktoro funding model as the base, and then it has invested in I think a couple hundred companies already. They have cohorts that they do twice a year of a few dozen businesses. They run them both in the United States and Europe now, and we're investors. So I think that is dipping our toe into the water of like, how do we start this boulder rolling down the hill?
No, that's really cool. And we've talked a lot about Sparktoro, but we have not spent time explaining what it does, what it is, how big it is right now. So maybe can you give us a bit of an overview of the business?
Yeah. So Sparktoro is a very small business. We have been in existence as a product for 2 years now. And we've got a team of 3. So it's just myself, my co-founder, Casey, and Amanda Natividad, who's our VP of marketing. And she, does an outstanding job. But the 3 of us are basically able to manage, what do we have? We have about 1,400 paying customers today. Wow. It's a software as a service business. I think that, we don't disclose our finances, but I'll tell you that we are quite close, probably about between 6 to 9 months away from being able to repay our investors their initial sum, and then kind of, participate in profit sharing after that. That's an exciting milestone for us, definitely.
Definitely.
And it's very encouraging to see that the business's profits per month are quite substantial because our costs are so low. And I think that, we may start to reinvest that in growth a lot more next year, but for now it works really well for us. And so Sparktoro, the product, is essentially, there's lots of ways to explain it, but one of my favorites is, let's say you are a marketer or a market researcher, or you're a founder, you're a product manager, right? And you want to understand the behaviors and demographics of an audience so that you can, build a great product for them and go market that product in places where they pay attention. And so conceivably, the best way to do this, Guillaume, is, I don't recommend this, by the way. Please don't take this clip and then put it online. Oh, here's Rand giving excellent marketing advice. Okay, so the absolute best way to do it would be get the home addresses of all your potential customers, and then go to their house, break in at night. You want to steal their phone, and then get their unlock code, right, for their phone, and then you can go through their phones and see, every YouTube channel they subscribe to, every email newsletter that they read, every event they've attended, all the people that they follow on, social media, Twitter and LinkedIn and Facebook, and what subreddits they read, all this sort of information, what websites they visit, et cetera, et cetera. This, of course, is incredibly illegal and super unethical, and you will probably get arrested the first house you break into. So not very pragmatic, but Sparktoro is essentially an alternative to this. So what Sparktoro does is say, we can't get all this data, but it turns out that tons and tons of people, in fact, hundreds of millions of people around the world, put this information online publicly through their social and web profiles, right? So I can go to your LinkedIn, I can see all the groups that you're part of, I can see, all the data that you put in there, and then from your LinkedIn, I can go to your website, and that links to your Twitter account. I can figure out, okay, so here's his Twitter, and okay, here's all the people he follows, and this is how active he is on this network, and then I can go to Instagram and see all the people you follow there. All of that is public, right? It's open for anyone to see. If you have a public account, you could choose to make it private, of course. And so we basically crawl the web just like Google does. And we keep this information, we anonymize and aggregate it. So no personally identifiable information. You can't, if you search for, whatever it is, I want to see data on chemical engineers in the UK, or I want to see people who play Dungeons and Dragons, the game, or I want to see information about people who are obsessed with drones, or audiophiles, who love high quality audio equipment. Sparktoro can show you all this data about them in an anonymized and aggregated way. So we'll say 16% of SaaS startup founders listen to Bootstrapped stories with Guillaume.
Yay!
Right. And this is really great information, because then as a marketer, maybe let's say you're ProfitWell or something, right? And you want to reach more SaaS founders. Hey, let's talk to Guillaume. Maybe we can get Patrick on the show. Maybe we can them to do a co-sponsored event. Maybe we can, advertise on their, on the podcast, all those kinds of things. And that targeting is it's kind of impossible. Like, I don't honestly, other than building your own crawler and doing this data manually yourself, getting that information is really hard.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I think it's really awesome. It also like what I love about your product is it's an alternative to like just spending and pouring your money at Google Ads and Facebook Ads, because you can definitely like and again, what you mentioned earlier, I think for me is also really important in how we build businesses, and this is also why okay, we are aware that we have a lot of monopoly, like the Facebook, the Google, LinkedIn, etc. And smaller businesses in the end, help you spread the wealth. And as you said, on an economic standpoint, it also like reinject more money into the economy, which down the line makes everyone like happier, etc. Like if you look at, all the study about happiness, how people, behave with each other, etc., you would see that the less, I think, the spread between the poorest and the richest, the smaller that gap is, and the happier people are, like the less inequalities we have, etc. And I do feel like, as you mentioned, being able to spot really cool podcasts you could do partnership with, etc., where actually it's not a guy that is a billionaire like doing a podcast, and it's just like other small businesses helping each other out. I think this is pretty awesome, and it's really cool that you're helping people to connect in that way, I think.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that thank you. One of the things that I love about it is, one, it's much more effective, right? So, you run, a Google Ads campaign and you might see a return on investment, but it's going to be limited, right? Google's goal, Facebook's goal, Amazon's goal is to essentially say, oh, you're selling this product for $100, or you're selling this product and making $100 of profit. I think we should charge you $99.99 to advertise it, right? For every customer that we send you. That's kind of their goal, right? Is to reach right up to the profit margin. That's how they're incentivized. And so as a result, right, that's how the auction bidding systems across these ad platforms work. And, in times of lots of growth in the economy, you'll see people unprofitably spending to get customers, hoping that, they can make up in volume by having future purchases from those customers, all that kind of stuff. So it's a little maddening to try and compete in that ecosystem and to realize, that the incentives are just against you, as opposed to, oh, hey, here's this niche website. They have an email newsletter. How do I get into that newsletter? Could I get them to write about me? I could get them to write about me potentially for free, right? For elbow grease work, where I'm just right? I'm building a connection. I'm doing something interesting and of value. I'm pitching them a story idea. I'm working with them in doing some research together. Or how do I pitch to get on that podcast? Or how do I pitch to have that YouTuber write about me? Or how do I, get this person who's on Instagram to come to our space? Or, whatever it is. Those types of sources of influence marketing are just more effective. So yeah, right. There's this global good kind of thing, and also net positive for your particular business. We see this all the time. I'm sure you see this with Thumblist, right? That essentially, we'll see a spike in signups, a spike in interest and attention. And it is very often when an episode like the one you and I are having comes out, right? It's like, oh, that launched. And then over the next, 4 or 5 days, lots of people went to Sparktoro and started a free account, and some of them, over the next few weeks, ran out of searches, and they were like, I want the paid version, whatever it is. It's hard to track, right? Google and Facebook and Amazon are going to make sure that your analytics look beautiful, right? Every ad you buy is like, oh my God, you got every one of your customers through, the Google display network or whatever it is, right? Like, the multi-touch attribution says we're responsible for that. And I don't buy it at all, man. I think a ton of that, very frankly, is non-incremental. I think it is correlation, not causation.
No, I agree. And I do also feel like it's important for people to understand that, business in the end, even if I see a lot of people, who are like pushing to data-driven, extremely complex attribution model, etc., in the end, business is pretty simple. Like you are helping people solving a problem, do that. Focus on the things that brings value to others, even if you can't measure it, and your business will grow. Because they are like, how do you measure word of mouth? How do you measure exactly that they are coming for this podcast? You know, like for me, and even, you know, like you could say, okay, let's ask our customers. But sometimes your customers don't know. Like I remember once we were starting to do that in the early days of Lemlist, where we would ask people, you know, like, where did you hear about us? And we had like several channels, and then we had put like other. In other, people were saying like Facebook ads or Google ads, and then I was like, I've never spent $1 on ads. Like, how is it possible? So sometimes, you know, like you ask something to people, and because they don't know, they're like, yeah, it must have been an ad or whatever, you know?
No, I mean, so many people go, marketers especially, right? Look in their analytics, and what do they see? They're like, oh, Google sent us, you know, a ton of our business, 50%, 60% of our business or traffic or whatever it is. And so we need to spend more on Google, more energy, more effort, you know, do more SEO, do more paid search. And then you start to dig into the details. And a lot of the time what you find is that is brand search, right? People searched for your business name or your product name. And you're like, gosh, I wonder where they heard about that. And you can't ask them, because people are not good at remembering, oh, where did I first hear about Dyson vacuum cleaners?
Yeah.
I have no freaking idea. I know I spent, you know, $500 on one, but I don't remember the first, was it advertising? Was it word of mouth? Was I over at someone's house and I saw it? Did I read about it in the news? I don't know. Right. And probably many of those things contributed, but you can very assuredly invest repeatedly in finding your customers' sources of influence, seeing what they actually pay attention to, talking to them, interviewing them, surveying them, using tools like Sparktoro or other ones. SimilarWeb can show you like other websites that, you know, that an audience visited. Helixa.ai has a service like this. Brandwatch has an enterprise version that does some, right? But you're figuring out, what does my audience pay attention to, and then you're being present in those places. And that is incredibly powerful. It's just hard to measure. And I think this is why it doesn't get investment, right? And this is why so few founders, especially, right? SaaS founders are unfortunately not great at this. They are not great, myself included, at, before we build our product, answering the question, who is going to amplify this to the customers that will buy it, and why will they do that? If you have a great answer to that question, great answer, I mean, you know, specific list. Here's what my customers pay attention to. Here's why those places are all going to cover me, write about me, feature me, you know, broadcast and amplify what we're doing, and do it repeatedly. You get an answer to those, and things go really well.
Yeah, I 100% agree, and it makes me think about like the second part of the podcast, which I think is really also important, because you've been doing a lot of it, which is creating content. And as you mentioned, you know, like you can create content in partnership or create content yourself. Your content strategy, I think, has always been like top notch and providing tons of value, like from many years from now until now. You know, so it's really impressive. What would be for you like the kind of process for someone who has never created content before and who thinks, okay, you know what, like maybe I can't measure everything, but how do I go from there? What do I focus on? Should I track any metrics? What should I do exactly?
Yeah, that is a huge question that
exactly.
10,000 page guides and books probably would struggle to answer. But I'll try and give the short version, at least from a strategic perspective, which is essentially, I think that if you are going to dip your toe into the content creation field, especially in SaaS and as a startup, it is crucial to understand what is my audience interested in? So what are topics that resonate with them? What are things that they talk about? I think it can pay to look at things that they search for as well. But this is very difficult right now. I am unaware of any product on the internet that you can purchase that will tell you, here's what search keywords chemical engineers in the UK use or interior designers in Los Angeles use. Like that data is just not in existence to my knowledge. Maybe it's someday something that Sparktoro could do, but what you can get is you can get interviews and surveys and passively collected data at scale from social networks, right? By looking at all this stuff and see the conversations and topics that are holding people's interest. You can see what what they're sharing in terms of like, oh, this article did really well in this subreddit, and it did well on among this community on LinkedIn, and it did really well in this group on Twitter, and those kinds of things. That is a great place to start, because you've got to train your brain not to think about essentially your customers directly, but to think about what do they pay attention to that could lead them to us. And this is a little bit of a mind shift. So I see a lot of companies that invest in content marketing essentially produce content that promotes their product directly to who they think is the right buyer. And it is not a great strategy, because, or at least it's not a great strategy by itself. You can't do just that, because you won't attract an audience, right? There's too many people competing for, I don't know, whatever it is, the best subscription management software, the best accounting software, like all that kind of stuff. What you instead want to do is say, okay, all of the accountants and chief financial officers and comptrollers and all these kinds of people in these roles at the businesses that we want to reach, they all read these 6 magazines, and these 2 podcasts are really popular, and there's like 4 or 5 YouTube channels that they subscribe to, and there's about 50 Twitter accounts that are well followed, and there's these 7 LinkedIn groups, and there's a few groups on Facebook. Great. And now your question has to be, what would I do? What content, right, would I create? Video content, audio content, a talk for an event, a tweet, a social media post is content, right? That can work as well. A story that the press might pick up. What are those things that you could create that would be likely to get covered by those sources? They are essentially the customer for the product of your content. And so you have to shift your mentality from I am marketing to customers of my final product to content is its own product. The content's job is to serve these sources of influence. If it does a great job of serving them, they will amplify it, which will bring people to me, and now I can turn their audiences into my audience. This is essentially what I would urge everyone who's thinking about dipping their toe into content marketing to think of from the strategy perspective. And then you'll go figure out what those topics and interests are, and you'll create that content. And now you have your list of where you need to go market it.
That's really, really interesting. And I love the mind shift, from trying to produce high quality content where you're going to talk also about your product, etc., making it actionable, from, okay, my content is actually a product that I need other people to find value into, and then they would share it with their audience. And building up on that, I've got my question, which is, content distribution is usually something that a lot of people struggle. We know that the best content online is not always the one that is the best indexed on Google. And actually it's most often the best articles are not the one that are, the one that, shows up on first page are not always the one that are the best by far, by the way. And the question is, okay, how do you distribute that content? Let's say you produce something that is of high value. How do you make sure that your content can actually be shared by those influencers or people who are generating trends? Do you have a distribution plan or strategy you use?
There's no silver bullet here, right? The reality is that I think 2 things are true. One even if you have a great strategy and a great distribution mechanism, most content that you produce will not sort of hit the big time, right? It's not going to accomplish its task. And this is why content marketing is such an ongoing process. So you say, hey, Rand, you've been really successful at content. And I have. Content marketing has been something that's been a strength for a long time. And still, it is probably the case that, even today, where I have probably the highest, what I'd call hit rate that I've ever had in my career, I would say probably 2 to 3 out of 10 pieces of content that I produce achieve what I hope that they would.
Okay.
Right? Essentially get lots of coverage, lots of amplification, bring lots of people to Sparktoro, get lots of our right customers and right potential customers knowing about us and maybe coming back and trying, signing up for the free version. That is just how content works, right? Even if you're very, very good at distribution. And so I think the first thing to realize in the distribution game is it is a hits-based business, and you will need to take many stabs. And I promise you, if you're just dipping your toe into the game, your hit rate is not going to be 20 or 30%. It's going to be 5%, maybe 3%. And you have to find your footing, right? You will have to repeat this process over and over. But the good news is that because it's so hard to invest in, because it takes a long time to show progress, because you will do it over and over and fail a lot until you sort of learn what works for you and your audience's sources of influence, because it's so difficult to do all that, very few of your competitors will keep investing in it. And that makes it easy to stand out a few years into the process. I can tell you with surety that everyone I've talked to who's great at content marketing failed for years before they became successful at it. And this is true for businesses and for individuals. And most of those businesses that tried it, the CEO, the CMO, whatever, the decision makers were like, all right, 6 months, we spent 50K, throw in the towel. This is not working, right? They stop and they just keep throwing money at ads. And this is why the ad ROI rate is so low, but at least you can track it.
Yeah.
Right. And content the other way around. When you get into that distribution strategy, I think my best advice there is every time you produce a piece of content, before you create it, when you just have sort of the title and the idea of it, you should have a list of people you think would be helpful in amplifying it. Like, hey, there's these 5 people on Twitter, and like if they pick it up, it'll be great. And our email newsletter, like that's a good way to distribute. We've started, there's a few hundred people subscribing today, but in the future we're going to get more and more people into that email list, and therefore we have to keep it tightly focused on the content subscription rather than like everything subscription. You might have some distribution networks that are less direct, people on YouTube, people with podcasts, people with interview shows, people with events and conferences and webinars that would want to have you on to talk about that thing. And you should make a list of those folks. So my advice is, and I sort of do this informally now, is to have like 20 or 30 people in publications that I think would be likely to pick up a piece of content when I do it. So last week is a good example. Guillaume, we published this piece about, what percent of Twitter's accounts, public accounts, are fake, spam, bots, inactive. And we did it because, we saw Elon Musk's tweet about it. And then the Wall Street Journal dropped us a line and said, hey, you have this fake followers tool. Would you blah, blah, blah. And we were like, okay, we'll take the weekend and we'll put the report out on Monday. This is 2 weeks ago now. And we knew, nice. Right? Like I knew that as soon as we published that, I was going to email the folks from the Wall Street Journal. They were going to pick it up. A few other reporters from other publications had reached out to, right? So I already had my distribution network built in, and we were essentially taking, hey, here's this relevant thing that's happening. It sort of shows off our capability of identifying fake and real accounts, which is really important if you're doing audience research, right? Yeah. You don't want to research a chemical engineer in the UK who hasn't been online for 4 years or whatever, right? You need active people. And so this got picked up by, oh my God, I don't even know. Like if you look in Google News, it's like 500 plus outlets. Like
Wow.
just everybody in their, Sparktoro got a tremendous amount of attention.
That's
I will
huge.
say this, not our ideal customers. Like a lot of them.
Okay. Just curious people
sort of,
and yeah, okay.
What are the Elon Musk fanboys called? Muskrats? I don't know. Something
I didn't
like
even know
anyway,
they had
lots
a
of them, right? And a lot of weird right-leaning news sources, which sent some seriously problematic traffic, as you might imagine. But it was a very successful piece. It was the kind of thing that did well. Amanda does the same thing whenever she publishes, right? She's essentially got her hit list. She knows who's going to cover it. She knows how she's going to distribute it on her social channels. And then, we both do this thing where after a piece comes out, we will re-promote it several times because we know that sometimes that first pickup is not when it goes big. And I've had this a number of times with articles that sort of went big 6 months after publication.
And I've got like two questions for you. The first one is, have you ever done ads on the title of an article just to see which one would get the highest click-through rate? So for example, let's say you have written an article, you might be hesitating between, let's say, like 4 headlines, and you know that the headlines can have an impact. So you run ads at the headline and see which one has the highest click rate. Is that something you are not really?
I'm trying to remember. We did it. Someone did an experiment when I was at Moz. So this is years ago now, but
not conclusive, or
so there's several problems with it. The first problem is searchers who click are different than people who share on social media.
Okay.
And they are different. The people who click on social media are also slightly different sometimes from what I would call the sources of influence that want to have you, right? That want to feature you and amplify you. And so sometimes you can do better in terms of amplification with what I'd call a less clickbaity viral headline and a more journalist, blogger, influencer, coverage targeted headline, right? So it's not speaking directly to, you will never believe what pasta has been outlawed in Italy.
So less bullshit, more actionable,
less consumery, less sort of bullshitty, less clickbaity, less BuzzFeed, and more sort of Reuters, Associated Press targeted types of things. Like I think our piece was, what was the headline for that? Yeah, so Sparktoro and follower Wonk did a joint analysis. 19.42% of Twitter accounts are fake or spam.
Wow. Okay. Yeah,
it's
you have a number.
Not sexy, but it it sounds like the kind of thing that if I'm a journalist covering data on the field, that sounds reliable.
Yeah,
right.
Those
people sound trustworthy and like they know what they're doing. So different positioning.
And I'm actually curious, what's your view on Elon Musk acquiring Twitter? Because he's saying that he wants to remove, obviously, like all the bots, et cetera, like making it decentralized or whatever, which I think is like far ahead of time. But what is your view kind of like about it? Like, do you feel, because I know you've been using Twitter a lot, so what's kind of like your view on the whole situation?
Let's see. He is a very capricious and sort of unreliable person, right? So his viewpoints on things change from day to day, and his actions, especially, outside of, I'd say, his core businesses, right? So SpaceX and Tesla, maybe he's a little more straightforward or even keeled, but even there, it seems like there's some challenges. But I would be very nervous for Twitter's future if he acquired it. I think maybe it's possible that some things would improve, and it's also possible that it would be disaster. I don't think anyone would be particularly surprised if it's like 2 years after Elon Musk's acquisition, Twitter shuts down for good. Like that would not, no one would be like, oh, I can't believe it. That would be a completely, credible possibility. And my preference would be that it remains independently owned, and that there's a board of overseers that are more invested in the company's long-term success and have some legal obligations around that too. I also think Elon has a very strange idea about what freedom of speech means. So I don't think, for whatever reason, he seems like an intelligent person sometimes, and then like a person who, I don't know, has never read other times, is very odd to me, right? But the freedom of speech in the United States, right, of course, is based on this idea that Congress will not prevent anyone from allowing and disallowing the kind of speech that they want. So, for example, Guillaume, if I start shouting racial slurs during our podcast, you are not forced to produce that, right? You don't have to put up our conversation. It doesn't have to be on your platform. I think my frustration is that Elon Musk and people like him will say, well, that's infringing on freedom of speech. And it's not. Yeah. That's not what freedom of speech means. You have freedom of speech on your podcast, your platform, just as Twitter has freedom of speech on its platform to say this is allowed and this is not allowed. And I think we all know that healthy communities are created when platforms enforce rules, when they have good, moderation, when those rules are fairly enforced and evenly enforced. And Twitter's had its challenges, although I think the last few years it's gotten better.
It's getting better, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, gotten a lot better. And I would hate to see a return to the like 2016 era of Twitter when, my wife got like daily death and rape threats. That is not an environment where you're going to get a lot of participation in positive ways. If you are looking for that kind of community, you can build your own. You can go to 4chan. You can go to what's the Donald Trump network? Parler,
I forgot.
Right. Mm. So those places, they're not hugely popular, but they do allow for that kind of horrific stuff, and that's their right. And Twitter's right is to do what it wants. I think that they're going to build a much more successful business if they make it a safe, comfortable, kind place for people to be.
Yeah, I agree. 100% aligned. I want to wrap up like the podcast with basically like the last 4 questions. First one would be, what's your favorite book or podcast that you could recommend to bootstrap entrepreneurs?
Oh man, so I got a great book. Wait, found it. I had to dig around. I haven't put it on.
Going to the garage.
This is the latest one from Molly West Duffy and Liz Fosslien, Big Feelings. And I just think, I think the world of this book. It's so great. Like one of the things they do, Guillaume, so they have all these, like it's very readable too. They do a lot of illustrations and graphics and that sort of stuff, like in the book itself.
That's really cool.
This feels like an ad for it, but they did not pay me. I bought this book.
You're an amplifier. You see, it works.
Yeah. So I think what's great about it is that there's sort of a trend around bringing your emotions to work and being a complete human being in your job. And they sort of captured that, I think, before anyone else has started to write about it and talk about ways to do that effectively. It's really great for founders too, because it'll talk about how you can build an environment where people feel psychologically safe at their jobs. And that is incredibly well correlated with performance.
I love it. We'll definitely order that one. It's now on my red list.
Yeah. If you could get, oh my God, you should see if you could get one of them on the show. That would be incredible.
Yeah, actually, definitely. I'll have Killian.
In fact, I think Molly West Duffy might have DM'd me. Look, I might be able to make an intro.
Ooh, that's cool. That's really nice. Who's your favorite Bootstrap founder and why? That's a lot of pressure.
That's way too hard. Okay, so I'll give you two people who are incredibly impressive, and I sort of think the world of their work. One of them is Tara Reid from Apps Without Code. So she's built this like very chill work sort of business that has scaled beautifully, that's doing a lot of revenue and has made her incredibly successful. I think she's like a decade younger than me. Like she is just amazing. When I stepped down from Moz's board of directors, she took one of the independent seats on the board, and we didn't talk about it, but Moz sold last year. I believe that is not a coincidence.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah. So Tara is amazing, and folks should definitely check out what she's up to. The other one is Peldi Guilizzoni. He's the founder of Balsamic in Italy, which is one of the few sort of like breakout success software businesses in Italy. But what an incredible company he's built, and this amazing team. I think there's like 30 or 40 people on the team, and they've had like 2 departures in the last 10 years. Like people come and they stay and they do incredible work at this business, and they never want to leave. And that, the product is just this, it's like intentionally ugly in a way, because it's wireframing, right? It's designed for folks like you and I to like quickly prototype and like create products in our mind, and then show that to people and have no one think it's a final version. So the font is Comic Sans, and like it's all scribbly, and it's amazing. Like you can do incredible things with that product.
Really cool. And what's the favorite thing you do to regain energy during tough times?
I play video games, actually.
Nice. What's
I've
your
been kind of
favorite
obsessed with. I don't know if have you played Hades yet?
No.
Yeah,
it's
man.
Good.
Oh, it's so good.
I can
the
see with your
writing's
face.
good,
Like,
the action's good. Hades.
Nice. That's cool. Awesome. Well, Rand, thanks a lot for being on the show. Where can people follow you and learn more about your journey and story?
Yeah, I am most active on Twitter, as you mentioned, where I'm at Rand Fish. Unless some billionaire buys it and turns it into a hellhole. In which case, you can check me out at sparktoro.com/blog, or email me direct. I'm rand@sparktoro.com.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Rand, and have an awesome day. Take care.
Yeah, you too, Guillaume. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Bootstrap Stories, the only podcast where bootstrap entrepreneurs share their journey in all transparency. If you enjoyed this episode, don't hesitate to leave us a review. And in case you want to see the interview, all episodes are live on the YouTube channel. Check out the link in the description and hit subscribe if you haven't already. Have an amazing day, and make sure to also join us in our amazing Bootstrap community, where we all helped each other to become successful and grow a profitable business. Take care and talk to you soon.